Hello and welcome to another IsBlab video. I'm your pal Patrick. Thank you for stopping by. Right now I want to talk about a Kotaku article that I read, written by Jason Shreier. I hope I pronounced his name right. It could be Shreier. I don't know. Shreier? Anyway, a Kotaku article that he wrote back in June on the 28th. Well, it was posted. I don't know when he wrote it. But all of these are particulars that don't matter. What I want to talk about is the article that he wrote, and it was concerning Google's plans to create a streaming platform, a game streaming platform that they are codenaming YETI. So, according to Jason Shreier, okay, I'm just going to say Jason. According to Jason and the 5 people who either were briefed on the topic or got the information secondhand, this is what Google is trying to do. They're trying to create a game streaming platform. Apparently, Google intends to achieve this in 3 ways. Streaming, of course, duh. Hardware. Now, for hardware, I don't know if it's talking about a console, which I doubt, or a device that acts as a link device, much like the little Steam device that allows you to link your TV to whatever game that you happen to be playing on your computer so that it streams to that link device and then comes up on your TV. Maybe that's the kind of hardware it's talking about. And the procurement of game developers or acquisitions of, I'm assuming, game developing companies, the acquisition of game developing companies. Google met with some big video game companies at the Game Developer Conference in March of this year to gauge the interest in its streaming platform. In the article, Jason speculates that the service could run in a tab in your Chromebook, or even in your Chrome browser for that matter. He didn't say Chrome browser, but that's what I'm adding in there. I mean, it's a streaming service, so why not? And that YouTube could be integrated into this service. Now, there are a couple of things that come to mind when I read this article. Number one, I'm thinking of online. Years ago, probably almost a decade, if not longer, OnLive tried a similar service, but internet connectivity was not what it is today. So, unless you lived just a few blocks away from OnLive's server farm, you were going to have a horrible experience with incredible lag and poor visual quality. But like I said, internet connectivity is very different now. It's more reliable, it's much faster, especially with fiber optics, and Google has its own fiber optics system, network, circuitry, I don't know how you call it, but Google has its own fiber optics, so they're at a considerable advantage than what OnLive was. And I also remember reading years ago, I can't remember how long ago, but I believe it was Google that purchased a barge. And it wasn't a barge that was going to be deep into the ocean, way out into the ocean, international waters, nothing like that. It was going to be sitting right there on the coast, docked right there. Well, I say right there like you guys know the location that I'm talking about. I don't remember the location, but the barge would be docked. And this is where all of their servers were to be housed. Now, this would be ideal because it's perfect for cooling the rooms or the barge itself that houses these servers. So, when I think about that and I think about what they're trying to do now, I wonder, was this something that they were planning on years and years ago? Well, it would seem that developers are still a little nervous about doing game streaming, and rightfully so, I guess, because of the failed attempts of the past, and probably because of the hardware required to make something like this work. I'm going to try to share with you an experience I had with something similar, and hopefully I'll be able to discuss it without rambling and confusing anyone even more. I used to work for Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino, California, and yes, this is the same Inland Regional Center that had the terrorist attack against it. I left a few years prior to that to concentrate on earning my bachelor's, but while I was working there, I was tasked with the responsibility of, let me see if I can describe this properly, creating a virtual desktop environment. Okay, so basically what we wound up doing with it is we turned it into the training room. New hires would go into this room and be trained on the different software and, computer operations and different things like that. The part that makes it the virtual desktop is that instead of having actual PCs or workstations, as they are called in the IT world, a little technobabble for you, you would have thin clients. Now, these thin clients were almost bare bones. As a matter of fact, a little less than bare bones. And basically, these thin clients did nothing more than connect to a remote server, relatively remote, and it would basically send commands, send user input, and receive imagery. That would normally go to a monitor connected to a server or a workstation. It would actually go through the network into this thin client and then display it on the monitor that's connected to the thin client. Now, let me explain the server side of it. You have a server in a regional center. Let me explain this real quick. Had 3 buildings. The training room was in building 3, and the server room, MDF, was in building 1. So, the physical server was in building 1, and it housed a number of virtual servers, one of which was actually a workstation. And the workstation was a virtual operating system, Windows 7. And the way these thin clients worked, and it was actually through a specific software that we purchased through a company called InComputing. The way these thin clients worked is that these thin clients would access the operating system on that server, and it would just be a single operating system. But these thin clients would access it as separate profiles. Now, if you're at home and you have maybe one computer that the whole family uses, then maybe each person in the family would have their own login, their own profile on that computer. Of course, being just one computer for the family, not everybody can use that computer at the same time. However, the software and the technology and the thin clients from InComputing allowed people to do just that virtually. They would access it all at the same time, the same operating system, but as separate profiles. So instead of needing 10 operating systems with separate product keys, it would just be one operating system, one product key. Of course, you would need multiple product keys for whatever software you were using, but we're talking about the operating system, just one operating system, and 10 simultaneous profile connections. It was so slick. And the interesting thing about this is that you really only needed to worry about the 4 gigs required to run Windows 7 and maybe say 2 gigs per connected user. So between the 4 gigs for the operating system and the 20 total gigs, you have 24 gigs to make this work. Not counting the RAM needed for the server to operate on its own and the other servers that were connected. But we're not talking about all that. We're just talking about this setup. So as far as the people were concerned that were training, if they were looking or if they were training and they were working, moving the mouse, typing on the computer, looking at the computer screen, it might as well have been a workstation right there in front of them. Because that's how seamless this connection was. And I'm thinking that this is what Google is going to try to attempt with these game developers. They're not trying to, say, pull these games, these existing games, and make them available, at least not the way they are. I'm thinking that Google is trying to get these developers to come together and make these games that will operate in the same way. One game installed on, say, a single server, or maybe multiple games, I don't know, but let's just say one game on a single server with multiple users accessing it through individual profiles. That cuts down on hardware, cuts down on the workload, and you don't have to worry so much about life cycles for a bunch of different consoles. And I think that's, like I said, what Google wants to do with this new streaming service. But again, a little bit of a stigma to that because of its, past failures and because of how much this will actually cost. What kind of price is this service going to cost? I mean, the server itself, let's say you just have one server with one game with 10 people connected to it. I guess the smart way or the typical way would be to take all the hardware that's required to make it run smoothly for each user, take that total cost and divide it by 10, and I guess that would be the monthly price for a user. So what kind of price would that be per user? I don't think that would be a $10, $10 a month subscription. I think another thing that is causing developers to be a little skeptical about this is because of something else that Jason mentioned in his article, and that is that Google has a habit of starting these projects and then canceling them. Now, I get the impression that Google is the type of company that says, if we're going to try this, let's go all in and do our very best to make it work. So it's very likely that these canceled projects were not by any fault of Google, but because it's happened so often, well, people aren't all that excited to jump on board. Now, this is a little off topic, but I'm also thinking about Amazon here, and this is more about how difficult it can be, I guess, for new companies to break into the game developing business. Amazon founded the Amazon Game Studios the same year it purchased Twitch. And I haven't seen, that was back in 2014, I haven't seen any new games come from come from Amazon Game Studios. Jason mentions a game that they were developing called, let's see, what is it called? Let me look at my notes here. It was a sports brawler, there it is, called Breakaway. And apparently they canceled it last year. Who knows what that would have been like? I just thought I'd bring that up. I really actually hope that Amazon is able to really make something and become a really good company. Who knows? Maybe they have games in the works now that they're working on. I checked out their website. There's not a ton of information. I guess because they're still a new company and they don't have too many games to talk about. Now, this also makes me think about the game streaming service that Nintendo is trying to put together for the Switch. And it makes me wonder, is this going to be one of those game services that, you're going to access from some remote server farm, God knows where, or is it going to be just one of those simple, well, I guess I shouldn't call it simple, but a streaming service where it's really just streaming from your consoles at home or your computer at home. Yeah, you can take it with you on the go, but it's not coming from some server you don't know anything about. It's coming from home. I wonder if that's going to be the way it works, or if it's going to be more like what Google is trying to implement. This will be very interesting. Again, the code name for this game streaming platform is YETI. And I think it'll be very interesting to find out what it is they are actually able to do with it. May I just pass some stats on to you that I think are on par with video streaming, and I think it shouldn't be any more demanding as far as streaming goes than video streaming. But to stream standard definition, you need 3 megabits minimum. Is it bits or bytes? I want to say bits, but it could be bytes. But I think it's bits. Well, I'll just say bits, and if I'm wrong, you can correct me. Standard definition, 3 megabits per second. HD, 5 megabits per second. 4K, 25 megabits per second. So that's just to bring all of this into perspective. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I guess I'll catch you next time. No. Am I ending this? I guess I am. Well, at least this topic.